Hi, my name is Jamie Gow and I'm the Technical Marketing Engineer for the Cisco Unified Attendant Consoles. In this video I'm just going to take you through the configuration of the Attendant Console server. So I've opened Internet Explorer and navigated to my publisher server. If you're installed in or have installed the Premium Edition, then you may have a publisher and subscriber server with replication between the two. If you have installed Enterprise, Business or Department Edition, then you'll just have a single server. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in, and the default username is admin and the default password is Cisco, and go ahead and click login. Okay, once you're logged in, the first thing I'm going to show you is just go to Engineering and Administrator Management, and this window, this page will allow you to reset the default password. So you might want to do that for security reasons, so type in the old password, which is Cisco, and then just type in a new password and confirm that password and click on save. Now if you are using Premium Edition and you have a publisher and subscriber, any information that you enter here is replicated to the subscriber, so you only need to do it once, and the configuration that you do must be done on the publisher server. You can't direct the input configuration into the subscriber. Everything else under engineering is just more to do with the server management and to do with login information. Now you can leave all the default settings in there. The only time you might change that is if you need to raise a case with Cisco TAC. They might ask you to change some of the login levels, in which case they'll direct you to the correct page and correct information for changing that. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to System Configuration and go to Queue Device Groups, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Add New, and I'm going to give my queue device group a name, and click Save. Now queue device group is a group which you're going to assign to a queue when you come to later on in the configuration, and the group is going to contain a pool of CTI ports which are used by the Attendant Console server for handling and redirecting calls. Now the queue device groups are only available in Premium Edition and Enterprise Edition. They're not available in Business Edition or Department Edition, which means in Business and Department Edition you can only have a single pool of devices, whereas with Enterprise and Premium you can have up to 20 groups, therefore 20 pools of devices. And typically you'll configure different groups if you require different settings on your CTI ports for different queues. So if you want calls into a particular queue to have different music on hold source, or if you want to use different calling search spaces or different partitions, you'd configure a different group, and then you would then assign that group to the individual queue that you create, therefore using those different settings. Now once I've created that group, I'm going to just go ahead and click on my publisher machine name just on the left hand side there, and it's then going to ask me for a template device. Now if you watched the video for how to configure your call manager, then you would have seen how to create the template device. If you haven't watched that, then I'll just recommend that you quickly watch that just to see what needs to be done on the call manager side of things. So I'm just going to click on Find Template Device, and if I click on Find, that will just list all of my devices information that's in my call manager. I'm just going to look for device name, begins with template, click Find, and it's going to find that template device that I created. It's selected there, so I'm just going to go ahead and click Save. And then in the top right hand corner there, related links, I'm just going to select back to System Device Management, and you can see that's now saved in there. What it's then going to ask me to do is enter some CT gateway devices, service queue devices and park devices. Now the CT gateway devices are CTI ports, and they are used for virtually queuing calls whilst they wait to be answered. So if you have 30 lines into your business, you might configure in here a range of 30 lines, or you might require less. Typically what we say is the amount of devices that you configure in here should match how many calls you expect to be waiting in a worst case scenario at any one time. So I'm just going to go ahead and in my system here I'm just going to configure 10 devices. Service queue devices are again CTI ports, and they are used by the operator when they place calls on hold or when they transfer calls. They use the service queue devices for those functions. The recommendation here is for you to create around 4 to 6 devices per operator. Again here I'm just going to create 10 for my system. And then park devices, once again CTI ports and used for call parking by the operator. Now this isn't the built-in call park device range that you might have in Call Manager. These are separate devices and they're used specifically by the console operators. Now how many you enter here is really dependent on how heavily you use that feature. No real recommendation, just have enough devices in there to allow the operators to park as many calls as they might need to. Again, in my system here, I'm just going to create 10 devices. And I'm then going to go and click on Save. And now because I'm running Premium Edition, I've got these warnings at the top just to warn me that the total number of CT Gateway devices for all servers within a queue device group should be the same. And the same for the park devices and service devices. All that's referencing is to go ahead and repeat that configuration for the subscriber. The subscriber server also needs a range of devices entered, but these should be unique to the subscriber server. They shouldn't be the same devices. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my subscriber server name, and this time I'm going to enter the device range for the subscriber server, and you should create the same amount of devices on both servers. And again, once you've entered them, just go ahead and click Save. And then you'll see the status to say that update is complete. Next thing I'm going to do is go into System Configuration, and I'm going to select Directory Source Management. And this is where you can configure the directory synchronization. Now if you're running Premium Edition, you'll see in here, if I click on Find, you'll see you've got a Call Manager source, Active Directory source, or an iPlanet source. You can activate any one of these, or you can activate all three at the same time if you like. If you do activate more than one and the contact exists in the Call Manager and Active Directory, you will have duplicate entries within your database, so you should make sure you take that into consideration before setting up your configuration here. If you are running Enterprise, Business or Department Edition, then you can only configure the Call Manager source. Active Directory and iPlanet is not available as an active source in those editions. So in this system here, I'm just going to go ahead and configure my Call Manager source. So I'm going to click on Select alongside the Call Manager, and first thing I'm going to do is enable this synchronization. And then just click on Save. See the update's complete. It's taken the host name and the host port and the username and password from the information that you entered during the installation of the software. If you want to go ahead, you can just test the connection. You can click on Test, and you can see Directory Source Connection Test Succeeded. That's just confirming authentication with the Call Manager. I'm then going to go ahead and click on Directory Synchronization. And I'm going to have these options selected, so auto synchronization on startup, on reconnect. So if for whatever reason your Attendant console server restarts, it will automatically do a new synchronization. Just beneath that, I have select a route partition. Now if you have devices in your Call Manager configured with the same DN but in different partitions, you can choose the partition that you want to prioritize in the Attendant console directory, and it will sync that directory entry only. Now if you don't want to do that, you can just leave it as selected as none, and that will then import all of the devices regardless if they're duplicate numbers or not. Just beneath that is my schedule. So my type here, I'm going to select my schedule, I'm going to select it to run daily, and I'm going to select that I want it to run every 1 day. I'm going to select my start date for tomorrow, and I'm going to select my start time as 2 AM. Now when the directory synchronization does run, there is extra load on the server whilst it runs that sync, so the recommendation here is for you to run it out of business hours if you can. If you're 24 hour, then obviously doing that is impossible, so you should try and run it at a time where you're going to have less activity going on your Attendant console server. And then once you've set that, click on save, and again you'll see the status update complete. I'm just going to click on back to directory source, and the next thing I'm going to do is configure directory field mappings. The directory field mappings is only available in Enterprise Edition or Premium Edition. If you're running Business Edition or Department Edition, you don't get the directory field mappings information. And if I click on that, you can see here these are the default fields which are mapped. So these are the fields which are going to be synced across from the call manager, and if there's information in these fields in the call manager, you'll see them in the destination fields in the Attendant console client. If you want to go ahead, you can delete some of these field mappings if you like. The minimum ones that you do need to have is telephone number, first name and last name, so you need them for the synchronization to run, but any of the others you can delete if you want to. With these mappings in place, in the console directory in the client, the fields which are mapped will be greyed out and they're uneditable by the operator. That's because they're synchronized from the call manager. Any field that isn't mapped is fully editable by the operator themselves. So I'm going to leave my field mappings as the default, and I'm going to click on back to directory source. And the next thing I'm going to do is click on directory rules. And there's a rule here already set, which is the default rule, so I'm going to click on select. And what this will let me allow to do is create a rule filter. So I'm going to show you how to do this. I'm going to click on add new, and the rule filter will be used if you want to only synchronize specific contacts as opposed to the whole end user table. So for example, I can select my source field as department, and I can say equal to sales and click save. And all that means now is when I run the synchronization, only the users that exist in the call manager that have a department which is equal to sales will show in my Attendant console directory. Now obviously you might not want that. You might like the whole directory to be displayed to the operator, so I'm going to go ahead and just delete that rule filter, and I'm not going to have any filter created whatsoever, and that will synchronize the whole end user table. And that is your directory source configured. Next thing I'm going to do is go to user configuration and general properties. Now you have a whole host of settings in here which you can configure. The first one's here, minimum internal digit length. So this is the minimum internal digit length of your internal phones. So for me, in my system here, my device length is 4 in length, and I'm then going to select my maximum internal digit length. Now my digit length in my system is set to 4, but what I'm actually going to do is change that to 5. Now if you have, or you want to configure the ability for the operators to transfer calls directly through to voicemail, you can configure a prefix of something like a star. So the system will dial star and then the 4-digit number to transfer the call. So in order for the system to know that that's still an internal call, that star counts as a digit, therefore that's why I'm setting this to 5. External access number, for me that's going to be 91. What this means is if I have a number in my directory which is longer than 5 digits, I'm going to treat it as an external number, and I'm automatically going to add a 91 to that number, therefore dialing out to that external number. Now if your call manager handles that itself, or you don't need that, you can just leave it blank and then we won't append the number when dialing it. And then the external international access number, for me, I'm going to put 9011. So if I have E164 numbers and it's in the correct E164 format, it will correctly dial, translate that number, stripping the plus and the brackets, and appending it with the 9011. Then you also have the default FAC and CMC settings. If you have FAC and CMC settings configured on your call manager, you can enter the information in here so the operator doesn't need to enter those details manually every time they transfer the call. I don't have that set, so I'm not going to configure it here. Next thing you have is recall timers. Now there's 4 recall timers here: hold, transfer, park and camp on. If a call is held by the operator, after the configured amount of time here, if that call is still on hold, the PC will play a audible alert through the PC speakers to the operator just to let them know that they still have a call on hold, and it will also change the status of the call to hold timeout. Now I have it set to 30 seconds here. I'm going to leave it as default. If you don't want it to time out at all and alert the operator, you can just set it to 0 to disable it. The transfer recall timer is if the operator performs a blind transfer, so they perform a transfer to send it straight through to the end user without introducing the call first. If that call goes unanswered, if it's not picked up by voicemail or forwarded to a cell phone, then after this timer here, that call will return to the operator that made that transfer and allow them to rehandle the call and transfer it somewhere else. Park recall is pretty similar to the transfer recall. So if the operator places a call on park for a user, if after 90 seconds or whatever time you configure here, the user that the call was parked for hasn't picked it up, again that call will recall to the operator and allow them to rehandle it. The only difference here is if the call has recalled after being parked, although it has recalled, the call is still physically parked, so even if the operator can't get to it, the person that it was parked for can still pick it up at the same time. Camp on recall. Now you can set the attendant console operator to automatically camp on calls to an extension if it's busy. The key here is if the extension is physically busy, so you're getting busy tone back. What we'll do is we'll camp on the call to that device, so we'll hold the transfer and we'll constantly monitor that endpoint, and if it becomes available, we'll then complete that transfer, or if after the time configured here, we'll recall that call back to the operator. Next thing I'll show you is the call arrival mode. When the calls are queued and waiting to be answered for the operator, the callers will hear by default just ringing. Now if you select this option, then the calls will be answered by the system and placed on hold, and that will then play the music on hold source, which is configured against the CTI ports that have been configured for the system. So the caller will then hear the music on hold. Just beneath that is the working days, and this is where you can configure the working days and hours of your operators. So I'm going to go ahead and select Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I'm going to select my time as working from 9 until 5. And all that means is any calls that come into the system outside of this time, they're going to be redirected to wherever you configure the queue's night service destination. And the night service destination is something that you'll see shortly when I go ahead and start configuring the queues. Once I've set all those settings, I'm just going to go ahead and click on save. And then again, the status up here, update complete. And then the next thing I'm going to do is go to user configuration and queue management. Now with this attendant console server, the way in which the calls are routed is the calls will hit a translation pattern, and that translation pattern will translate the call to a CTI route point, and that CTI route point will be configured as a queue. The calls will hit the queue and wait to be answered by the operators. The operators themselves log into their phones with a single line a single extension, and that's the extension that the queues deliver the calls to when they select to answer a call. So what I'm going to do here is click on Add New. Now, if you're running Premium Edition, you can create up to 100 queues. If you're installing and configuring Enterprise Edition, you can configure up to 50 queues. If you're installing Business Edition, you can create up to 3 queues. If you're installing Department Edition, you can create up to 5 queues, but each queue can only be serviced to a maximum of 2 operators. So you need to consider that if you're looking to choose a different edition. Now I'm going to go ahead and give my queue a name. You can name this however you want. Now in my system here, I'm just going to create an external queue. I'm also then going to go ahead and create an internal queue. So all I'm going to use that for is separating out my external callers and my internal callers, just so the operator can handle them differently. What you also have in the Attendant console solution is the ability to run reports. So you can run reports on the individual queues as well to see how many calls they're handling. Now what you might do in your situation is have a queue for different locations. You might have operators based in different buildings that might want their own queues. You'll see in a few minutes when you create an operator user, you then associate the queue to that user. What that means is only the queues that are assigned to the operator, only the calls that are within that queue, that operator will see. So you might configure different branches, different locations as your queue names. What you can then do is configure a priority. Now if your queue is configured to use broadcast delivery, and I'll explain that now. Broadcast delivery is if a call hits the queue, it will queue within the Attendant console server and it won't physically ring on the end user's phone. At this point, all of the operators that are logged in that have access to that queue will be able to answer that call. What you can also do is configure false delivery by ticking this box here, and what that will do is force the call out of the queue and make it ring on one of the operator's phone. It will only ring on one of the phone at a time. If that operator doesn't answer the call after 10 seconds, that call will then be presented to a different operator to allow them to answer it. Now with the priorities, that's what the system will use for prioritizing the call that will be answered by the operator next. So for me, because I'm configuring an external queue and an internal queue, I want to treat my external callers with a higher priority. I want to answer them first. So I'm going to change the priority here to 1. 1 is the highest priority, 99 is the lowest. Then going to select, or I can then enter a salutation. Salutation is just a free text box which allows you to enter information, and when the operator answers an incoming call, a little box will pop up and it will show this salutation information. Typically it's used more for if your operators are temporary staff. If you want them to answer their incoming calls in a specific way, you can enter the text in here and the operator will then see that information. Then I'm going to select my queue device group. The one that I created earlier with my CTI ports is queue device group 1. At this point I'm then going to choose if I want to use false delivery or not. Now one thing you should know is once you've saved and created this queue, you can't change this option. So just make sure you're aware of the differences between the two as I explained earlier and choose the right option. If you do need to change it, you can go ahead and just delete that queue and recreate it. I'm then going to click on save. And you should see the status update complete. There it is. And this then gives you some additional configuration options. Now the full CGI Failure Device, this is only available in the Premium Edition. What this allows you to do is configure a device number, and that device number can be anything dialable by the call manager, so it could be an IP phone, it could be a hunt group, it could be voicemail, it can be whatever you like. And all this will do is configure call forwards on the CGI route points for in the event that your publisher and subscriber both fail, the calls will redirect to this number here. Emergency mode, this just allows you to select a destination type. Destination type is either a device or another queue within the system. I'm going to select device and I'm going to enter again 1001. Again, you can enter any number in there that you like. And emergency mode is something which is invoked by the operators themselves. If for whatever reason they have, let's say, an evacuation during their normal working day, they can put the queues into emergency mode and the calls will automatically redirect to the number that you've configured here. Just beneath that you have overflow triggers, so you can configure maximum amount of calls. If you want to only have 5 calls within your system, I'd set here the number 5. Again, I'd select my device as my destination type and enter my number. And all that means is if a 6th caller comes in, that's not going to queue within the system, that's going to automatically redirect to 1001. You then have the wait time overflow, so I can select if a call has been waiting for a certain amount of time, so I'm going to select 3 minutes. Again, overflow to this number. And then the last one you have down here is no operator. I'm going to select again device 1001, and this is just used for if there's no operator logged in to the attendant console, or if they've set themselves to unavailable, then again the calls will overflow to this destination. And then the last option here is your night service. I'm going to select device and I'm going to select 1001, and that means anything outside of the hours that I just configured under the general properties for my working times, the calls will be redirected to that number. Now, if you want the flexibility of the operators coming in early and being able to answer calls, or staying late and you want them to be able to answer calls, what you might want to use is the no operator overflow as your night service trigger. So in this case I'll just select that to none, not configure the night service destination, and the opening hours will be determined by the operator when they're logged in or logged out. And I'm going to click on save. And the next thing I need to do is configure the DDI for this queue. This is a CTI route point. As I mentioned earlier, this is what you'll then translate your incoming number to. So I'm going to click on new and I'm going to give this my DDI 8500. I'm going to click on save. It's going to then give me a warning saying DDI not assigned to all servers for the queue. Again, I need to do this for the subscriber server. It needs to be a unique number. And I'm going to enter 9500 and click save. And that's update complete. Now if you're using Business Edition, Department Edition or Enterprise Edition, some of these menu options will look slightly different because you don't have the subscriber server. But it's basically the same setup, you just need to enter the single number. I'm then going to go back to queue, and I'm then going to go back to queue management, and I'm going to select add new, and I'm just going to go ahead and create my internal queue as I mentioned before. And again I'm going to select my settings that I want, click on save, and I'm just going to go ahead and enter the relevant information for this queue. You'll see that these settings can be different on a per queue basis, so each queue can be handled differently if you want to. I'm just going to set them the same as I did for my external queue. Click on save. And then once again I need to add the DDIs for these, so I'm going to click on my publisher server, enter a number, click on save, and then do the same for my subscriber. Click on save, and then the next thing I'm going to do is synchronize with SeeYouSeeEm. And when I click that option, it's going to take me to this page here, and this is now going to go off and create all of the CTI ports and CTI route points that have been configured within the system. CTI ports that I configured earlier against the queue device group, and the CTI route points that I just configured against the queue. And it's going to list them all there. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, and I'm going to select synchronize with SeeYouSeeEm. As it warns you here, it's going to take a few minutes. Would you like to continue? Click on OK. SeeYouSeeEm sync is now initialized, and I can launch up a system sync report here, and that will show me the status of the synchronization. And like I say, this is just going to go ahead, create all of those CTI ports and CTI route points, and then also associate them to the relevant application user which you configured on the call manager. Now, for the sake of the recording of the video, because this will take a few minutes, I'm just going to pause the recording. Okay, you can see now that the status is completed. So that's now created all of the CTI ports and CTI route points and associated them to the relevant application user. So I'm just going to close that window, and the last thing I need to do is create my operator user accounts. So I'm going to go to user configuration and operator management, and I'm going to click on add new, and I'm going to give my operator a login name and set a password, confirm the password, and click save. And then you'll see a new page pop up with queue association. This is where I can associate the queues which I created. So if you're configuring queues for individual locations, you can just associate the queue relevant to this operator. In my case, I'm going to click on queue association, click on find, and I'm going to associate both of my queues there. I'm going to click on save selected changes. And then I'm going to click on back to operator and click on save. And that's completed. That's my operator account created. You can go ahead and go on back to operator management and add some new operators. You can create as many operator accounts as you like. The amount of concurrent operators is based on your licensing, but that's just on how many people can log in to the Attendant console. You can create more operators than what you're licensed for. And that completes the configuration.